The first time I realized someone else had been living my place in my father's life. I was standing in the waiting room of a physical therapy clinic holding a blueberry pie. An elderly man sitting beside the window smiled at me and said, "You must be Daniel." I smiled back. "I am." He nodded toward the hallway. "Your dad talks about you every week." I felt something inside me loosen. That sounded like him. Then the man laughed. "He says those Thursday phone calls always cheer him up." I stopped smiling. "I don't call him on Thursdays." The old man's expression changed. "Oh." Neither of us spoke after that. Somewhere down the hall, I heard my father laughing with someone. For a moment, I honestly believed the man had confused me with another family. I didn't know then that someone had spent almost a year making sure my father believed I had never stopped calling him. If stories about families, hidden truths, and impossible choices keep you listening, subscribe. Sometimes the people protecting you are the ones hiding the biggest secrets. My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm 52 years old. I've spent almost 3 decades repairing commercial refrigeration systems across northern Ohio. It's not glamorous work. Most days begin before sunrise in the back of a service truck that smells faintly of motor oil and coffee. Restaurants don't care that it's Christmas. Hospitals don't close because a freezer fails. Food warehouses can't wait until Monday. Things break. I fix them. That's been my life. Steady. Predictable. The one person who always understood that was my father. Frank Mercer, 78, retired high school history teacher. The kind of man who folded grocery bags neatly enough to use them 3 more times. Every Sunday after church, he'd make grilled cheese sandwiches with too much butter and insist tomato soup tasted better from an old blue ceramic bowl he'd owned since I was 10. When my wife Laura died 7 years earlier, he never tried to fix my grief. He simply started showing up every Wednesday evening, sometimes with soup, sometimes with a newspaper clipping he thought I'd enjoy, sometimes with nothing at all. We'd sit on the back porch without saying much. Those evenings carried me through the worst year of my life. People talk about losing a spouse. They don't talk enough about the silence afterward. How one coffee mug suddenly feels too clean. How half the bed becomes untouched country. How every grocery trip ends with putting something back because you don't need to anymore. Dad understood without asking questions. Maybe because he'd buried my mother 12 years before. Maybe because grief recognizes itself. Things changed after he fell in his driveway. It wasn't a dramatic accident. No broken hip. No surgery. Just one bad landing during the first snowfall in December. He strained his shoulder and bruised several ribs badly enough that my younger sister, Melissa, insisted he shouldn't be living alone. "I'll move in for a while," she announced during dinner one night. Dad frowned. "I don't need a babysitter. You need help. I need people to stop treating 78 like 98. Melissa smiled the way she always did when she'd already decided the conversation was over. "You'll feel differently in a week." He didn't. She moved in anyway. At first, I thought it was a good idea. Melissa lived only 20 minutes away after her divorce. She worked remotely for an insurance company. Her son had started college. She had the time. Besides, Dad hated asking for help. Having someone around sounded reassuring. For the first few weeks, nothing seemed unusual. She texted updates. Dad's blood pressure looked good. Physical therapy was helping. He complained about the exercises, normal things. When I called, though, something kept happening. "He just fell asleep. He's in the shower. We're heading out. The therapist wore him out today." Every explanation sounded reasonable. Individually, together, they began to feel rehearsed. One Saturday in February, I drove to Dad's house without calling. His pickup sat in the driveway. The porch light was on. Fresh tire tracks crossed the snow. Good. Someone was home. I climbed the front steps carrying chili I'd made the night before. Before I reached the door, Melissa opened it. She looked surprised. "Daniel, I was nearby. You should have called." I wanted to surprise Dad. She didn't move. "He's sleeping." I looked past her shoulder. The television was on. I could hear a history documentary. Dad loved those. "He sleeps with documentaries playing now?" She hesitated. "Sometimes. I'll only stay a minute. He had a rough morning." I smiled. "I won't wake him." Her hand tightened around the doorknob. "It's really not a good day." For the first time in my life, my sister stood between me and my father's front door. It lasted maybe 5 seconds. Not long. Long enough to notice. Long enough to remember. Dad's voice echoed faintly from somewhere inside. "Turn that up," Melissa answered over her shoulder. "1 second. Then she looked back at me. "I'll tell him you came." I stared at her. "You don't have to." "What?" "I can tell him myself. He already fell asleep." A second ago, he'd been asking her to turn up the television. Now he was asleep. I almost pointed that out. Instead, I handed her the container of chili. "Tell him I stopped by." "I will." She smiled. The door closed gently. I stood on the porch another minute before walking back to my truck. On the drive home, I kept replaying the conversation. Not because it proved anything, because it didn't. That was the frustrating part. Nothing she said was impossible, just slightly wrong. The following Wednesday, I called Dad directly, straight to voicemail. I tried again, voicemail. 10 minutes later, Melissa called instead. "Dad's phone died." "Oh, I'll have him call later." He didn't. The next afternoon, he left a voicemail. "Sorry I missed you, Danny." He sounded cheerful. "Melissa said work's been keeping you busy." I frowned. I'd never mentioned work, not recently. I called back immediately. No answer. 3 weeks later, Dad missed Noah's birthday. My son had just turned 16. Grandpa had never missed one. Not once. He was the kind of grandfather who still mailed birthday cards instead of sending texts. He even wrote checks. Tiny ones. $20, $30. The amount never mattered. The handwriting did. That afternoon, Noah kept glancing toward the driveway. Maybe Grandpa got lost. I forced a smile. He's probably tired. Melissa texted an hour later. Dad wasn't feeling well today. We'll celebrate another time. Dad himself never called. That bothered me more than missing the party. Later that evening, I dialed his number again. Melissa answered. He went to bed. It's 6:30. The medication makes him sleepy. What medication? The new one. What new one? Silence. Then, I've got another call. I'll talk to you tomorrow. The line disconnected. Laura used to tell me something. If people stop answering simple questions, they're usually protecting a complicated answer. I found myself thinking about that sentence more often than I liked. The next Sunday after church, I stopped by the bakery Dad loved. Blueberry pie, his favorite. The woman behind the counter smiled. 2 this week? I looked up. Excuse me? You bought one Thursday. I wasn't here Thursday. Her smile faded. Oh. She glanced toward the older cashier working beside her. I must have mixed you up. Maybe she had. Still, I drove away, wondering why the mistake bothered me so much. March arrived with heavy rain. Dad's physical therapist recommended adding balance sessions twice a week at a rehabilitation center on the other side of town. Melissa mentioned it casually during one of our short phone calls. He actually likes the people there. I'm glad. You don't need to come. I wasn't asking. I just mean, she laughed awkwardly. The waiting room gets crowded. I said nothing. Why would the waiting room matter? 2 Thursdays later, a compressor failed at a grocery warehouse only 15 minutes from that rehabilitation center. The repair took less than an hour. As I loaded my tools back into the truck, I noticed the clinic across the street. Without really deciding to, I drove over. The blueberry pie from the bakery sat on the passenger seat. I figured I'd surprise Dad. Just 15 minutes. Long enough to say hello. Long enough to remind him Noah still had his birthday present waiting. Inside, the receptionist smiled. Can I help you? I'm looking for Frank Mercer. She checked her computer. He's finishing therapy. Can I wait? Of course. That's when I sat beside the window. That's when the elderly man recognized me. You must be Daniel. I am. Your dad talks about you every week. My shoulders relaxed. He does? Oh, constantly. I smiled. Then he added the sentence I still remember word for word. He says those Thursday phone calls always cheer him up. The smile disappeared from my face. I don't call him on Thursdays. The man blinked. What? I haven't talked to my father in almost 3 weeks. He stared at me as though I'd begun speaking another language. But, he frowned. He tells everyone you never miss Thursday. Neither of us noticed my father entering the hallway. He spotted me first. His entire face lit up. Danny! He walked toward me faster than I'd seen him move in months. Then he stopped. Confusion slowly replaced the smile. He looked from me to the blueberry pie, then toward the receptionist. Finally, he asked one quiet question. I thought you were coming tomorrow. For a second, I couldn't answer him. I thought you were coming tomorrow. Not. Where have you been? Not. Why haven't you visited? Tomorrow, as though we'd already made plans. We never talked about tomorrow, I said carefully. Dad frowned. Melissa said you called Tuesday. I didn't. His smile faded. You canceled because you had to finish a job in Toledo. I've been in Cleveland all week. The hallway suddenly felt too quiet. Dad looked at me for a long moment. Then he laughed softly. Well, one of us is getting old. The laugh didn't reach his eyes. Neither of us believed what he'd just said. The therapist called his name before either of us spoke again. I'll just grab my jacket, Dad said. I'll wait. He disappeared into the treatment room. The elderly man beside me leaned closer. He always talks about you. What exactly does he say? The man shrugged. Little things. You repaired another supermarket freezer. You took your grandson fishing. You called because your truck finally needed new brakes. My stomach tightened. Those things had happened. Every one of them. But I had never told my father, not recently. I had told someone else. Melissa. Dad returned carrying his light brown jacket over one arm. I've got 45 minutes before lunch. Perfect. I know a diner. So do I. We smiled at the same time. It felt almost normal. Outside, the air still smelled like wet pavement from the morning rain. Dad walked slower than he used to. Not fragile, just careful. As we crossed the parking lot, I noticed him reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out his phone, an older flip-style smartphone. I should let Melissa know. You don't have to. I don't want her worrying. He dialed. No answer. He shrugged. I'll tell her later. That surprised me. If she always knew where he was, why didn't she answer? The diner sat less than a mile away. Same cracked vinyl booths. Same waitress who called everyone Hun. Dad ordered tomato soup and half a turkey sandwich. I ordered coffee. For several minutes we talked about ordinary things. Baseball, the weather, Noah's driver's permit, his tomatoes. The conversation felt comfortable, almost too comfortable, as though both of us were avoiding something standing between us on the table. Finally, I asked, "When was the last time you came to my house?" He looked surprised. "February." "You haven't?" He frowned. "Sure I have." "You brought chili." "No. I brought chili." He blinked twice. "No." He smiled uncertainly. "You made chili." "Right, and you invited me over." "I wasn't there." He stared into his soup. "I remember sitting in your kitchen." "You didn't." Silence. He slowly set down his spoon. "Melissa drove me." "No." "Daniel?" His voice had become unusually quiet. "Are you telling me we've both remembered different versions of the same day? I think somebody's been telling us different stories." Neither of us spoke after that. The waitress refilled our coffee. Dad watched the steam rise from his cup. "When your mother was alive, she used to say memory isn't a photograph. It's a story." I nodded. "I remember. She said if someone keeps retelling the story, eventually you stop asking whether it really happened." He looked at me. "I don't like where this conversation is going." Neither do I. On the drive back to his house, I decided to ask something simple. "When did you last come over for dinner?" 3 weeks ago." "What did we eat?" He answered immediately. Pot roast." I almost hit the brakes. Laura's pot roast recipe had been my father's favorite, except I hadn't cooked it in nearly 2 years, not since the oven heating element burned out. "I don't own the roasting pan anymore." He looked confused. "What?" "I donated it after Laura died." His face slowly lost color. "Oh." Melissa's SUV was already in the driveway. She stepped onto the porch before we'd even parked. "There you are." She sounded relieved. "I've been calling." Dad held up his phone. It never rang. She looked at him, then at me, then smiled. "I guess the signal dropped." Another perfectly reasonable explanation. Dad climbed out first. "I had lunch with Daniel." "I know." "No." He smiled. "I mean, today." "I know." She nodded. "I'm glad." She never asked why he had left therapy with me. Never asked why nobody told her. Never even looked surprised. That bothered me. A lot. As Dad walked inside, Melissa stayed behind on the porch. "What are you doing?" she asked quietly. "Having lunch with Dad." "You know what I mean." "I don't." She folded her arms. He's getting confused. He wasn't confused until I started asking questions. Her expression hardened. "Daniel, don't do this." "Do what?" "Make him doubt himself." I asked him when we had dinner. He remembered. He remembered something that never happened. She sighed heavily. "The doctor warned us this would happen." "What doctor?" "You weren't at the appointment." "What appointment?" She looked away. For the second time in a month, I'd asked a simple question. For the second time. She answered a different one. That night I couldn't sleep. Around midnight I opened the kitchen drawer where Laura had kept old birthday cards. Some people keep jewelry. Laura kept handwriting, cards from friends, recipes, letters. She said handwriting proved someone had existed exactly as they were. I found one of Dad's birthday cards from 3 years earlier. Inside he'd written, Don't wait for the perfect day to visit. Ordinary Tuesdays disappear faster than we think. I stared at that sentence for a long time. Then I picked up my phone. There were 32 calls between Dad and Melissa over the previous month. 4 between Dad and me. Except, Dad believed we'd spoken almost every week. Someone had been filling in the empty spaces. The following Thursday, I called at exactly 9 in the morning. Dad answered on the second ring. "Danny, you sound surprised. I thought we'd already talked." "What?" "You called about an hour ago." My heart started pounding. "No. You told me Noah passed his driving test. He hasn't even taken it." Silence. Then I heard Dad breathing. Long, slow, uneven. Finally, he whispered, "Melissa was here." I didn't interrupt. She handed me the phone. "What phone?" "I assumed it was you." Every muscle in my body went rigid. "What did you hear?" "You. I wasn't there." Another silence. Then, "What if—" He stopped. "What? What if I never actually talked to you?" Before I could answer, another voice came through the line. "Who are you talking to?" "Melissa." Dad answered too quickly. "Nobody." The line went dead. I drove to his house immediately. 25 minutes. Every red light felt personal. When I arrived, the curtains were closed. Melissa opened the door only halfway. "What happened?" "I want to see Dad. He's resting. He just spoke to me. He got tired. I'll only stay 5 minutes." "No." She had never said that word to me before. Not like that. Not flat. Not final. "No." I stared at my own sister. "Move. I'm trying to protect him." "From me?" "From stress. I'm his son." "Exactly." The answer made no sense. "What's that supposed to mean?" She swallowed. For just a second. She looked less angry than frightened. "You think this is about keeping you away?" "It is." "No." Her voice cracked. "It stopped being about you months ago." I looked past her shoulder. The hallway was empty. "Dad!" I raised my voice. No answer. "Dad!" This time I heard something upstairs. A chair scraping across hardwood. Then, my father's voice. "Daniel?" Melissa closed her eyes. The sound coming from upstairs wasn't relief. It was panic. Melissa didn't move. Not even when Dad called my name again. For a moment, we simply stared at each other. I realized something then. She wasn't trying to keep me outside because she hated me. She was terrified of what might happen if I walked in. "Dad!" I called once more. This time I heard footsteps. Slow, careful. A hand touched the upstairs railing. Then my father appeared. He wasn't asleep. He wasn't resting. He wasn't even dressed for bed. He wore jeans, a gray sweater, and the reading glasses my son had given him for Christmas 2 years earlier. "Daniel." His face lit up. Then he looked at Melissa. "Why is he standing outside?" Melissa forced a smile. "I was just explaining that you were tired." Dad frowned. "I never said that." She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. He walked carefully down the stairs. "I've been waiting for him." He reached the front door. "Move, sweetheart." Melissa stepped aside without another word. Dad hugged me. Not the quick kind men usually exchange. The kind fathers give when they suddenly realize something important almost disappeared. "I thought you were coming tomorrow," he said quietly. "I know. I've been mixing days up." "No." I looked him in the eyes. "I don't think you have." His smile faded. Melissa quietly walked into the kitchen. Neither of us followed her. Dad settled into his recliner. The old blue blanket Mom had knitted still covered one arm. Everything inside the house looked exactly the same. Except family photographs had changed. The picture of Noah holding his first fish had disappeared. The one of Laura and me at our 20th anniversary was gone. In their place sat newer photos. Melissa, her son, her vacations, her office Christmas party. Small things, nothing dramatic. Yet somehow, it looked less like my father's home. More like hers. Dad noticed me looking. Melissa reorganized. It looks different. She said it would make cleaning easier. He sounded unconvinced. I asked if we could talk alone. Melissa immediately answered. Dad gets overwhelmed. I looked at her. I wasn't asking you. Dad smiled gently. It's okay. No. I kept my eyes on Melissa. I'd like 5 minutes. She hesitated, then grabbed her purse. I'll go buy groceries. The front door closed. Neither of us moved until her SUV disappeared down the street. Dad let out a long breath. I don't like arguing. I know. I don't know why everyone's been acting so strange lately. I sat across from him. Dad, I need you to answer something honestly. I always do. Do you think we've been talking every Thursday? He nodded. Almost every week. What do we usually talk about? He smiled. Noah. Work. The Indians. They're the guardians now. He laughed. See? Then he stopped laughing, because I'd never corrected him before. You don't remember? I slowly shook my head. We haven't had those conversations. He stared at me. I remember your voice. I know. You told me your truck needed brakes. I told Melissa. You said Noah wanted a pickup. I told Melissa. You talked about Laura. I told Melissa. Each answer seemed to take something out of him. Finally, he whispered, I heard you. I believe you did. He looked toward the front window. Then something changed in his expression. You think. She repeated your stories. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Dad stood up without another word. He walked slowly toward the hallway. What are you looking for? My desk. He opened the bottom drawer. Inside sat a neat stack of spiral notebooks. Every page dated. Every page filled with his handwriting. I started keeping notes after the fall. He smiled weakly. The doctor suggested it. He handed me one. Read February. I opened the notebook. February 6th, Daniel called. Truck repair. Noah scored twice. Very proud. February 13th. Daniel called. Bought blueberry pie. Busy week. February 20th. Daniel called. Laura would have laughed at the weather. My hands froze on that last sentence. Laura had been dead 7 years. Nobody mentioned her casually anymore. Except Melissa knew I still talked about Laura when something reminded me of her. I kept reading. Every Thursday, every conversation, perfectly documented. Conversations that had never happened. Dad watched my face. I wrote them down after we talked. I know. His shoulders slumped. I wasn't imagining them. No. You really think she... I nodded slowly. I think she told you my stories. We sat in silence until Dad quietly asked, why? That was the question, not whether. Why? I didn't know. Not yet. The answer arrived 2 days later, completely by accident. Saturday morning, Dad called before 8. Danny? Everything okay? I found something. What? I don't think Melissa meant for me to. I'm coming over. He met me in the garage, holding a grocery receipt. Nothing unusual about that, except the receipt wasn't for groceries. It was from a medical supply company. Wheelchair ramp, bathroom rails, hospital bed deposit, installation scheduled, my father's address, 2 weeks away. I looked at him. You ordered this? He slowly shook his head. No. Inside the envelope was another sheet. Long-term assisted living consultation. Estimated move-in date. June 14th. Current family representative, Melissa Mercer. No mention of me. Anywhere. Dad looked sick. I never agreed to this. I turned another page. Power of attorney paperwork. Not completed, not signed, prepared, waiting. A sticky note sat on top. Have Dad sign after neurology follow-up. I read it twice, then a third time. My father lowered himself into a chair. I thought... He stopped. What? I thought she wanted me safe. So did I. He looked around the garage. I don't understand. Neither did I. Not completely. But something finally fit. The Thursday phone calls. The invented visits. The fake dinners. The missing photographs. The constant interruptions. If Dad believed I visited constantly, he would never notice I was being pushed away. And if I believed he was too tired to see me, I would stop trying. Two different lies. Creating the same distance. Perfectly. That afternoon, Melissa came home carrying grocery bags. She stopped the moment she saw us sitting at the kitchen table. The folder lay open between us. No one spoke. She slowly set the bags on the counter. Dad looked up. When were you planning to tell me? She closed her eyes. I was trying to find the right time. The right time for what? To stop living alone. I am living alone? Her voice cracked. You will be. He frowned. What does that mean? She looked at me, then back at him. The neurologist. Dad stared. What about him? She whispered something so quietly, I almost missed it. He doesn't think it's just the fall. The room became perfectly still. Dad's face lost all expression. What are you saying? Melissa started crying. Real crying. Not dramatic, not manipulative, exhausted. He thinks it's early Alzheimer's. I looked at Dad, then at her. No one moved. Finally, Dad spoke. He told me. He said my memory might change. Melissa nodded. He told me not to overwhelm you. So you lied? I tried to make every week feel normal. She wiped her eyes. I knew you'd panic if Daniel stopped calling. I frowned. What? She looked at me. You weren't calling. So you pretended I did. She nodded. I told him your stories. Why not tell me the truth? She looked absolutely broken. Because I was afraid. Of what? That if you knew, you'd take him away from me too. That sentence hit harder than I expected. Not because it excused anything. Because for the first time, I understood her fear. But understanding wasn't the same as forgiveness. Dad looked at both of us, then quietly asked the question neither of us wanted to answer. If she lied about the phone calls, what else don't I know? Dad's question stayed in the room long after he finished speaking. If she lied about the phone calls, what else don't I know? Melissa didn't answer. She lowered herself into a kitchen chair and stared at the table. For the first time in months, nobody was trying to fill the silence. Dad looked older than he had that morning. Not because of what he'd learned, because he suddenly realized he didn't know which memories belonged to him anymore. Finally, he spoke again. When did the neurologist tell you? Melissa swallowed. Late January. You told me everything looked fine. I told you they wanted more testing. You said it wasn't urgent. They weren't certain. He rubbed both hands across his face. I remember that appointment. So do I. The doctor said I might forget names. He did. He never said I couldn't decide my own life. No. She looked down. He didn't. I reached for the folder again. Did he tell you to arrange assisted living? Melissa shook her head immediately. No. Did he tell you to keep me away? No. Did he tell you to answer Dad's phone? Another pause. No. So those were your decisions. She nodded once, very slowly. They were. Nobody raised their voice. That almost made it harder. I had imagined this confrontation a dozen different ways over the last few weeks. None of them looked like this. No shouting, no accusations flying across the room. Just three tired people sitting around the same kitchen table. Melissa finally looked at me. I know what this looks like. It looks exactly like what happened. I wasn't trying to replace you. Then why remove our pictures? She closed her eyes. I didn't even realize I'd done it. I pointed toward the living room. You replaced every picture of Laura. They were everywhere. So. Dad cried every time he looked at them. I turned toward Dad. He frowned. I did? He sounded genuinely surprised. Melissa nodded. Almost every morning. Dad looked at the photographs, then back at us. I don't remember. I know. She began crying again. And that's why I stopped telling you. There it was. Not greed, not hatred. Fear. Messy. Misguided. Controlling fear. She had started making little decisions because they seemed easier. One photograph, one answered phone call, one harmless lie, then another, until she had built an entire version of our family that only she controlled. Dad stood up. I need some air. I'll come with you, Melissa said. No. His answer wasn't angry, just firm. I'd like Daniel. She sat back down, without arguing. The backyard looked exactly as it always had. The old maple tree, the rusted bird feeder, the cracked concrete patio where Mom used to grow tomatoes in pots. Dad lowered himself onto the porch swing. It creaked the same way it always had. I've been scared. I know. No. He shook his head. You don't. He looked out toward the fence. I've been forgetting little things. Names. Appointments. I walked into the garage last month and couldn't remember why. He laughed quietly. I stood there 5 minutes pretending I was looking for a screwdriver. I didn't interrupt. I knew something wasn't right. He looked at me. But I didn't know who to believe. We sat together for several minutes. Then he asked, Did you stop calling because you were angry? No. I thought maybe I disappointed you. The words landed harder than anything else that day. You never disappointed me. He nodded. I kept wondering why you sounded different every week. What do you mean? Sometimes you talked too fast. Sometimes you didn't laugh. Sometimes. He stopped. Sometimes you sounded like someone remembering your voice. I closed my eyes. Melissa had known my stories. She had known the things I would probably say, but she hadn't known how I said them. Some part of him had noticed all along. He just hadn't trusted himself enough to question it. The following Monday, Dad asked for another appointment with the neurologist. This time, both Melissa and I went with him. The doctor was kind, direct, patient. After nearly an hour of testing and questions, he folded his hands. I want to be careful. Dad nodded. So do I. You have mild cognitive impairment. Nobody spoke. It may remain stable for years. It may progress. We simply don't know yet. Melissa stared at the floor. So, it's not Alzheimer's? Not at this point? No. He paused. But your family should plan together. He looked at all three of us. Together. I noticed Melissa begin to cry again. Not loudly, quietly, with relief. When we left the office, nobody rushed toward the parking lot. Dad stopped outside the entrance. "I'd like lunch." Melissa smiled through wet eyes. "The diner?" He looked at me. "Only if Daniel buys the pie." I laughed for what felt like the first time in weeks. I can afford pie. Things didn't magically become easy after that. Real families don't heal in one conversation. They don't fix months of broken trust over coffee and sandwiches. Dad asked me to attend every medical appointment after that. Not instead of Melissa, with her. He also signed paperwork giving both of us equal authority if he ever became unable to make decisions himself. His attorney suggested it. Dad liked the idea. "No more gatekeepers," he said. Neither of us argued. Melissa moved back into her own townhouse at the end of June. Not because Dad forced her to, because he wanted his house to feel like his again. She still came over every Tuesday. I came every Thursday. Not because someone scheduled it. Because we wanted to. Sometimes we all had dinner together. Sometimes we didn't. Life settled into something quieter. More honest. One afternoon in August, I noticed Dad standing in front of the family photographs. He had put Laura's picture back, next to Mom's, next to Noah's first fish, next to Melissa's graduation. Everything mixed together again. Exactly the way it used to be. He caught me looking. I figured, he smiled. It's easier to remember people if you let them stay where they belong. 3 weeks later, I found the spiral notebook again. This time there was a new entry. Thursday. Daniel came by after work. We argued about baseball. He still thinks he's right. He isn't. Blueberry pie was excellent, I laughed. Dad, what? The Guardians lost. I know. You were wrong. He folded the notebook shut. Maybe. Then he looked at me with the same calm expression I'd known my entire life. But this one really happened. Nearly a year has passed since that afternoon at the rehabilitation clinic. Dad still keeps his notebook. Not because he has to, because it makes him feel steady. Every Thursday, I stop by after work. Sometimes I bring coffee, sometimes pie, sometimes nothing at all. We sit on the back porch the way we did after Laura died. Some evenings we talk for hours. Other evenings we hardly speak. Neither of us worries about filling the silence anymore. When I leave, Dad walks me to the front door every single time. He waits until I reach my truck. Then he lifts one hand, the same small wave he's given me since I was 12 years old. I always wave back. Not because I'm afraid he'll forget I was there, but because now we both know the memory belongs to us.